Hey, y'all. Welcome to the Liberation is Lit podcast, where the power of storytelling meets the force of social change. I'm your host, Taylor Simon. And in this podcast, we believe in the profound impact of stories. And I am super excited to be here with one of my Black femme women scholar, I don't know. I just been following for a long time. And of course, I read Black Women Taught Us and really resonated with this. So I'm excited to be here with Dr. Jenn M. Jackson to talk about their book as well as just the role of Black women in scholarship. So, hey, how are you doing, Dr. Jenn?
Well, I mean, I've also been following you for a long time. So thank you for inviting me. I'm excited to be here and have this conversation. I love the work that you do.
Thank you. And I love the work that you do. Look at Black women and femmes coming together and just being like, yes.
hmm
So, to start the conversation, can you tell us a little bit about yourself as a writer and a scholar?
Yeah. It's interesting because the scholar part is new for me, right? I was born in Oakland, California, and I've been writing since I was a small child. I think a lot of us have our diaries and our journals, and we scribble here and there, and we never think anything of it when we're kids. But I've always had a writing praxis. I grew up reading books I wasn't supposed to be reading way too early, right? I was reading Sula in like the third grade, and Toni Morrison has been one of my favorite authors for the longest time. Zora Neale Hurston wrote the book that changed my life, Their Eyes Were Watching God. And it was after reading those books at a very young age that I thought to myself, well, maybe I'll be a writer one day. But nobody really encourages young Black people to write their own stories. And so I went off to college and majored in engineering and did all that stuff. And every time something catastrophic would happen in my life, I found myself going back to writing. Like I would start writing poetry again. I would go back to the same books again. And when I went to get my PhD, I went to do political science because I had been in engineering. I endured all this racism and sexism and homophobia. And I was like, there's got to be words for this, right? There has to be something about this that I can read to help me understand this. And I turned immediately back to Black feminism. And so my relationship to writing and scholarship really happened organically as I grew up in these dynamics and situations where I couldn't really put words to it. I was like, I don't know what this is. What is misogynoir, right? What is Black feminism? What does it mean to be disabled and move to these spaces, but also in a Black female body, right? And so I became a writer, I like to say out of necessity, right? The story is like mine, written, but not quite like mine. My scholarship is the same thing. I will never forget getting to graduate school and talking about police and jails and having people not know what I was talking about. Then I'm like, y'all ain't got no cousins that been to jail. Like y'all ain't never been arrested by the police. And they was like, no. I'm like, cool, then how y'all gonna tell anybody else about science, political science? Like, how are you studying power and you've never been under threat of power? And so a lot of my work around writing and scholarship is, that question of those intersections, right? Who these women are and were and how they ended up pushing against the state and pushing up against a government that was trying to kill them. And they wrote about it because they had to, because it helped them stay alive. They wrote about it because they wanted us to stay alive. They wrote about it because they wanted us to be here, right? And so all of my work is about that, is about a deep and enduring love of Black people and believing, as an Afrofuturist as I am, that we exist in the future. And we exist in that future outside of boxes and graves and prisons.
And I loved how you talked about this concept of writing out of necessity. And you talked about the scholarship part of your life being new.
Yeah.
But I think that kind of what you're saying, and as you were telling your story, it's that Black women doing these writing and these musings out of necessity is not always seen as scholarship. And
Right.
so, why do you believe highlighting and citing Black women scholarship, whatever it looks like, whether or not the powers that be deem it scholarship, why do you think centering that work is important?
Oh gosh. I love this, right? I think, the first Black feminist teachers I ever had were like my mother and my grandmothers and my aunties, right? These are women who do not have college degrees, They spent a lot of time in church and a lot of time in community. And a lot of their lessons came from their life experiences. And unfortunately, that is not seen as expertise, right? They always say that whatever we do in academia is research. I will never forget. Listen, I always start a story where I'll never forget. I'm a true Black person, okay? My first day of grad school at U Chicago, I was walking in the hallway with a friend of mine. She's a very petite Black woman, fairer skin. She's from New Orleans. And it was me and her and this white man, very senior professor came out and he stood over her and he put his hand on the wall and leaned over her into her face and said, "Why are all of you studying Black politics?" And now me being a Black person open, I was triggered. I was like, oh, we finna fight. This is gonna be a fight. So I slide in and I was like, well, why all them white kids studying Russia and Germany? You asking you hemming them up too? And he immediately backed up and was like, he was entertained by it. And it really said something to me about how flippant he was about us wanting to understand ourselves, right? About how dismissive he was, about how important it is for us to understand our own history. And I would argue it's the most important for us because it's been so intentionally erased, right? We've been so intentionally and strategically kept from it, right? And so to answer the question, like that's why I wanted to write this book, right? I've never taken a Black feminist class at all, Black feminist politics, Black feminist theory, not because I didn't want to, but because when I went through the course catalogs of these elite universities, these PWIs, there were no courses. If there were, I would have enrolled immediately, right? But what does it say when you're at these elite universities that are supposed to be the pinnacle of education and intellect in the country, and they don't even have us on the syllabus? They don't even have us on the catalog, right? And so I got to the point in graduate school where I was like, I'm actually tired of that. Like, I'm tired of reading all these books where gender is like one section or one chapter. Black women get one piece of the story when this had been my entire life, right? Like I would physically not be sitting here right now to speak to you if it were not for Black women always showing up. Let me just be honest with you, completely honest. I'm sitting in my friend's house right now. Her name is Chris Marsh. She wrote the Love Jones Court. I'm sitting in her house right now. She's letting me and my family, my 3 children and my puppy, stay in her home while I'm in the process of moving into my home. Black women show up, right? That is the reason why Black people are still here, because of Black women. And so for me, it was important for me that my first book tell the truth about who Black women are, were, and continue to be, right? I'm tired of reading books about us being villains who just angry and, want to fight all day, or, baby mamas with no depth and no history and no story and I'm tired of being rendered in these disgusting and deplorable ways. Tyler Perry then got us looking like who knows whatever is in his imagination. When the truth of the matter is that Black women stand in the gap for everyone, right? And so for me, it was like, well, the least I can do, right? The least I can do is tell the truth about that. And that shouldn't be radical, right? That shouldn't be that exciting, right? That should be what we are all doing every day.
And I loved how you said telling the truth shouldn't be radical. And it is when so many of our truths are actively being erased, like you were saying. And so I know you talk a lot about a lot of Black feminist scholars that we know and we love, but some who we don't give their flowers to enough. And so can you tell us a little bit about the Black feminists that you featured in your book, Black Women Taught Us?
Yeah. And that was something I thought was really interesting. When I wrote the book, I wasn't really thinking about who anyone knew or didn't know, because to be frank with you, this is about the journey that I took at a time when I didn't know any of these women, right? I discovered a lot of these women later in life, 20s, 30s, And so I think people know Angela Davis because she is still here. She walks the earth, and we are so grateful for her life and her breath. Most folks know who Bell Hooks is. People know who Shirley Chisholm is because they know she ran for president. But the people I've been surprised by when I'm on the book tour, they say, I didn't know who this was. I had someone tell me they had no idea who Fannie Lou Hamer was. And it made me so sad because in doing the research for the book, that was kind of apparent to me. I had a research assistant, and so for about a year or two before the book, we just sort of scoured the internet, scoured the archives, looking for anything we hadn't seen and read. Because, a lot of these women, their work will be kind of synthesized into just one factoid or one quote, or they'll say Harriet Tubman freed the slaves, and they'll leave out the whole story about her being a whole commander general, right? And so Fanny is often associated with nobody's free until everybody's free. But I didn't know about her Mississippi appendectomy until I did my own research, that she had a forced hysterectomy and that was one of the things that catalyzed her activism. I didn't understand how much of her work was rooted in the fact that she grew up very, very poor and destitute. I did not know that she died at 59 years old. And on her death certificate, they called her a housekeeper, right? These were things I had to actively, in my 20s and 30s, work to learn, right? And so I always empathize with people who say, I didn't know anything about this person, right? Harriet Jacobs actually starts the book, and almost no one knows who Harriet Jacobs is. But people will say, well, why didn't you start with Phyllis Whitley? Because that's the one we were all taught about, right? Like, we all saw Phyllis Whitley sitting at the table, right? She's in all these museums. But where's Harriet Jacobs? Very rarely do we see or hear about Harriet Jacobs. And while folks now know who Zora Hurston is because of Alice Walker's work to ensure her legacy, many people had no idea that she died destitute and that she died and was buried in an unmarked grave, right? And so some of this is like, what I'm learning is that people may know of, right, these Black feminist foremothers, elders, and ancestors, but they don't know us. They don't really know us. And that's a form of ignorance and intention as well, right? That's a systemic thing as well, right? To whitewash, water down, and I don't know, kind of anti-radicalize the narratives of these women's stories. Even with Audre Lorde, people associate her with the quote that self-care is an act of revolution, but have no idea that she wrote that quote in the context of a cancer diagnosis. And there's a whole book called The Cancer Journals, where she's talking about, actually, y'all killed me, right? That's what the book's actually about. Her self-care was a reaction to the way she had been exploited and extorted by academia, by Black men, by folks in community, right? And so what I'm finding is that people may know some of this narrative. They may know a few things about these women, but we're never encouraged to actually think of them as human beings, right? We're encouraged to think of them as beings, something we just share a year on their birthday, And that's what I want us to move beyond, right? I want us to start seeing Black women as more than props and ornaments for our performative radicalism, but instead as strugglers, co-strugglers, comrades, who, if not for them, we couldn't even sit here and be this lazy.
And it feels like we kind of reduce them to this one dimension aspect. And again, we could do a whole episode on Tyler Perry. But again, it's not just white people who are reducing Black women to this single dimension, and how we don't realize that the context of the world that they were living in, the world that we are currently living in, is what helps us do the work to move things forward.
That's right.
And that is just such a disservice to the ancestors who are no longer with us, but also the people who still are here and future generations to come.
Right.
And so I was having a conversation on another episode of the podcast with a historian talking about how it's able to get proximate to our historical everyday people in the archives, because if they're not deemed important enough to record their stories, we don't know anything about them, and how that is a structure of power. And I know that happens a lot in academia and in scholarship. So it can feel very dehumanizing. And that's
Yes.
why I said I was not going to be in academia. But what keeps you grounded in this work?
You know, I've been thinking about that a lot. I just relocated from upstate New York to Maryland, and I'm in the process of getting ready for my second open heart surgery in my life. And so I'm being grounded is something I'm like, woo, it's like you have to really work on it. And groundedness for me has always been about making sure I feel safe and making sure I feel well. And academia is not made for Black women to feel safe or well. We simply do not belong there. We are marooned there. Um, and so being marooned in those spaces means that we are always fighting. We're always fighting. Every day is a fight. And it's something that I've noticed in my life as I've developed healthier boundaries about what I'm willing to do and what I'm not willing to do. I've noticed how we as Black women will often allow certain violations of our boundaries if it means that the community will be okay, or if it means we can have access for others, or, you know? And what has grounded me lately is saying, fuck that. I ain't doing that anymore. What has grounded me lately is what I call a radical state of refusal. It's the story I tell about Toni Morrison all the time, where when she was off on a sabbatical writing, minding her Black business, and Oprah Winfrey called and she said, Oprah, how did you get my number? And that is the most iconic state of radical refusal to me ever, right? Most people, if Oprah called, they're going to drop everything. They're like, I don't, Oprah called, right? And most people is me. I'm most people. If Oprah calls, what you want me to do, Oprah? Yeah, I have a surgery, but do you need me somewhere, right? Tony said, how did you get my number? And I think that's honestly how we have to move, right? Like, I relocated from upstate New York to Maryland because this is where I want to be. This is where I want to live. These are the people who I want to be around. This is the food that I want to eat. This is the culture I want to be in. And I don't want to be marooned in a place where every day I have to fight to be a Black woman, to be a queer person, to be a disabled person, where people disrespect me in my face every single day. I don't have to do that. I can live in a different way. And I think groundedness, being a combination of being safe and well, means that we have to focus, yes, on the safe part, but we really have to focus on the well part. I think sometimes we think that if we feel safe, we'll also feel well, and that's not true, right? I'm from California. I grew up in a place where I get to go outside every day, and I can go to the beach, and I can get sun, and I can touch grass, and in the last 10 years, I've lived in Chicago and Syracuse where I can't do that, right? I've lived in places where it's snowing 9 months out the year, right? And where that's also not the culture. And so while I felt very safe in Chicago, I didn't feel well. I didn't feel well, right? And so I think something I really want Black women to do, and another reason why I wrote the book, I wrote it for me too, right? To hold myself accountable to a form of care and love for myself, right? Because I can't say I love and care for Black people if I'm not willing to show up and care and love for myself. And to stay grounded, I have to have a deep and enduring love to say, hey, you shouldn't be doing that, Franny, right? The same thing I would say to a best friend who's like, I'm gonna go do this, take this job somewhere where I'm gonna be lonely and sad and not eat none of the food I want and have people disrespect me. I would look at her and go, so when you planning on leaving, right? The same thing I would say to her, I have to say to myself. And that's what this book was. A reminder that Black women have already been showing me the way to do that. That's why Black women struggle against the state, because they're saying, I actually believe that this can be better. It's a form of accountability. It's a form of saying, we deserve better, and here's what better looks like. And so what I'm doing to stay grounded in this moment is trying to remind myself that I deserve to have a life that I curate for myself, that I feel joy in, that I feel safe in, that I feel well in, that I wake up and I go, I'm gonna go outside today just because, right? And I'm not gonna feel guilty about that. No one's gonna shame me for having a house where I can sit on the porch and smoke a joint and look outside and enjoy the land. No one's gonna make me feel bad about that because I deserve it, right? And so I think what I want people to take from this book in with respect to your question is that Black women have been fighting for that for so, so long. And we have a right to demand that, right? It's our birthright.
Yes, it definitely is. And by definition, when we get free, we all get free.
Right.
So this work is selfish, but also it benefits everyone.
That's right.
And I know you're in a huge transition, moving and about to get open heart surgery. And I always hate that I ask this question about upcoming projects because
Oh
rest
yeah.
is very needed. But talk your shit, talk yourself up. If do you have anything that you want to promote right now?
I mean, I'm also a Virgo, so of course I have like 75 projects. Of course I'm doing like 90 things. Yeah, I have a lot actually. So my next book that I think will come out next is called Policing Blackness. It's based on my research. This is a book that really centers the idea of threat and understanding what threat means to Black people. Too often when we say, oh, that's a threat, this is a threat, it's used in such an empty and useless way. And so what I wanted to do with this book is to say, white people walk around feeling threatened all the time, and yet nothing is happening to them. For Black people, when we say we are threatened, we have an empirical world. We have a whole world out there that shows us what the consequences of those threats are. So we can't even use those terms in the same way. The police roll up on a Black person, it's a whole different experience, whether they're at a sandwich shop, at a local lake, if they're sitting in their car minding their business, right? And so many other folks will never understand that. And so this book is really working to paint an entire comprehensive picture of what that looks like for Black people. The book that I think will probably come out next after that, I realized is not one book, but now I think it's two books. And so I've been writing a memoir for about 20 years. And when I first started writing it, I called it The First 20 Years because I had my last open heart surgery when I was 20, and I'm now 40. And something hit me the other day, and I said, I'm having heart surgery 20 years apart. I said, there's a book in there too, right? There's something happening here. And so what I realized is that, there's two books there. And so I have a memoir called A Black Girl in the Future, and it's about the first 20 years of my life leading up to my first heart surgery. And then I have a book called The Tall One, which is about my heart condition. It's called Marfan syndrome. So it's a Marfan memoir. And it's the period between my first heart surgery and my second heart surgery. I have two other books that are a little bit further off, but one is a fiction book that I'm writing with my co-parent, he's a brilliant author and incredible writer. And it is a science fiction book about a young Black girl who essentially begins discovering that she has powers and they're related to her ancestral kinship to her Black grandmother. And so it's a really interesting story set in Chicago. And I have one more book based on my research, which I will be hopefully pitching out next year, which is about Black social movement organization in the 20th century and how they were the kind of catalyst and underlying frameworks for the movement for Black Lives that we saw erupt in 2014. That's it.
See, every time I'm just like, let me get to writing because I need to keep going. I know I commented on your thread the other day, like I want
That's
to be
fine. I'm
like
like,
you.
just
Like,
do it. Listen, can I plug something real quick? I will say this.
yes.
Writing groups have saved my life. Whenever I see a writing group, I jump in. There's something on Instagram called a Black Writers Workspace. They just meet on Mondays and they just write together quietly. I attend that pretty regularly. Porch Literary Arts has an ongoing writers group. I'm in there pretty frequently. Like, I don't ever want to say like, oh, I just be writing and I'm just, no, I have to be in community. I have to remind myself. I have accountability partners. So I do want to encourage folks, like if you want to get to writing, you have to build, it's like a muscle. You have to build the practice just like reading, right? And if you build it, it will absolutely work for you. It's not, nobody is extra special because they can write 1,000 words in a day. They just have been doing it for a long time.
Mhm. Yes, and I go to Torch and I actually host a monthly writing circle with the City of Columbia's poet laureate Jennifer Bartell Blake, and we have the writing circle where we meet, I think Yeah, and to never remember if it's second or third Tuesdays, but it's all on the Instagram.
I want to find this. Thank you for telling me.
Yes, yes. And so my last question that I ask everybody is, what advice would you offer listeners who want to make a positive impact in their communities?
I love that. And I do love that about your work. Liberation is lit is so important to me. And so I think right now in this moment where folks are not really reading, and when they do read, it's like short form or it's not necessarily informative. I think in this moment, I again, from being from Oakland, I'm a very Black Panther-esque person. I'm on the radical side. I think one of the best things we've ever learned to take with us that we can carry with us at all times is the central ethos behind Black August, right? Black August, they tell us that we have to train, we have to fast, we have to study, and we have to fight, right? These are the four premises of Black August. And studying to me is one of the most important parts of that, right? Reading, a lot of reading. And I think one of the best ways we can make an impact on our communities is to start by reading and to understand what our ancestors and elders have already been doing, right? It's not because we don't know it on our own. It's not because we're not experts. It's because there's a genealogy. Everything has a genealogy. Historians know this. And this is why I love talking to historians. They will tell you about the time in 1946 when so-and-so Moss from so-and-so city said so-and-so. And it's incredible, right? And so I really want folks to, in this moment, in a moment where everything is kind of building off of miscommunication and misinformation, to go and read deeply and widely. Octavia Butler, Kennedy Ryan, Brittany Cooper, Casey Lehman, right? I just finished reading Sibyl Campbell's Sky Full of Elephants, and I felt so inspired. That last line, I reread the last two chapters 4 times. I just wanted to hear it again, you know? And so that, and the other part of that is train. And fasting is also important, but people often think that fasting is about not eating something. But fasting is off of anything that is not helpful towards your goals. So if it's maybe you're on social media too much, right? Or maybe you're in toxic relationships, so people need to fast from some of that, right? But training is so important. And the way we train is in community. These are the two things I really want people to do. Go and study up and then go into community with other folks who are like you, who want to affect community, who want to change our literacy rates, who want to keep bookstores alive, who want to see Black people thriving, right? Go be with other people who are doing that and build together, right? Nothing worth doing is done in isolation and individually alone, right? Everything worth doing is done in community. I could not be here without my community. And so I just hope that people will see your podcast and pick up these books, right? And then go out and find people who are like, oh, yeah, me too, right? Find them because they're all out there and we need to be together in this moment.
Mhm. And people always ask me, why do you say so hopeful during these times? And I'm like, literally being in community with people and building together
Yeah.
because nobody's coming to save us. We got to save ourselves and
Right.
seeing people do the work and having a group to do the work with is what keeps me hopeful.
Say,
Yes.
say,
So this was such a great conversation. Thank you so much for being on the podcast. Where can people keep up with you and find your work?
I am everywhere. I need to sit my butt down, but anywhere on the internet at Jenn M Jackson PhD. I'm on Bread, Blue Sky, Instagram. My Substack. I would really love for people to be on my Substack. I really do share a lot more of my deeper thoughts there, and it's kind of my writing home right now. But Jenn M Jackson PhD. Anywhere on the internet, you'll find me.
Little jingle.
It did
Well,
right.
thank you. Yeah, yeah, because you're a poet at heart, of course. Well, thank you so much again. And thank you, listeners, for being a part of the Liberation is Lit podcast. If you have stories you want to share, want to suggest any topics, or just want to connect, find us on Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok at Liberation is Lit, or visit our website, liberationislit.com. If you enjoyed the episode, please consider leaving a review. And remember, your voice matters. And together, through the lens of stories, we're going to make a difference. Until next time.